बलोचानी माँ छुपके बलोचानी, छुपके बलोचानी माँ छुपके बलोचानी, छुपके बलोचानी माँ छुपके बलोचानी, छुपके बलोचानी माँ छुपके बलोचानी।
11th August has a historical importance in Balochistan's history. This is the day when the Baloch nation was freed from the chains of slavery of the Great Britain. It was the end of the Britain rule in Balochistan and in the subcontinent. This was the day when the Baloch nation and Balochistan's freedom were announced from the many international medias, including New York Times and the Indian radio. But after 6 months of the Balochistan's freedom, a newly formed country which was created out of India, Pakistan, has forcefully occupied Balochistan. And since then, the Balochistan has never seen a day of peace, happiness, or freedom. The Baloch nation have been resisting both in political or armed way to regain their freedom and to establish their free and sovereign country. Today, in this talk, we have a panel of distinguished guests. We have a veteran Baloch activist and intellectual, Mir Mohammad Ali Talpur, who is also known as one of the close friends of late Baloch leader Nawab Khairbakhsh Mari. Along with him, we have the Central Information Secretary of Baloch National Movement, Dil Murad Baloch, and Baloch intellectual and leader of Baloch National Movement in Canada, Dr. Zaffar Baloch, will be shedding lights on the historical events and what the world could do and they should do now to help Baloch people to regain their freedom. To begin with, our very first guest and the speaker for today's talk is Dr. Zaffar Baloch. Dr. Zaffar Baloch is a Baloch intellectual and he is representing Baloch National Movement in Canada. So let's listen to his words, what he has to say about those historical events which occurred in August 1947 and how the Baloch lost its freedom and how they did not got any proper help from the world. They promised them help, and what the world can do now to help Baloch people.
Today, 74 years ago, Balochistan won independence from the British colonial powers on August 11th, 1947. Today marks that day of independence for the Baloch nation. As a sovereign nation, we became a part of the international community. But our joy of freedom was short-lived because the newly created Pakistan invaded the sovereign Balochistan 9 months later after our independence on 27th of March 1948. And since then, for the last 73 years, the Baloch nation has waged several struggles and uprisings for their rights, for their freedom against Pakistan state and against the Pakistan military and its occupation, the illegal occupation of Kala and the rest of Balochistan. Balochistan has always been on the crossroads of history as we know it because of its geostrategic location. And from Alexander the Great to the British Empire, and later what was the creation of Pakistan in 1947, Pakistan's occupation again forced us to become part of another state that rules over Balochistan's sovereignty and its rights and its freedoms have been neglected, have been repressed. Our political rights have been repressed since then, and thousands of Baloch, for in so many different times of struggles since 1948 up till now, the current ongoing struggle that started 20 years ago. Thousands of Baloch have been disappeared, have been abducted by the military, families have been displaced. These are the conditions that that have been imposed upon us since the 19th century. That was the time of the Great Game, the rivalry between the British Empire and Russia at that time. And we became entrapped. The Baloch nation was occupied by the British in 1839 on November. So since then, we were forced to become a kind of a military garrison for the British Indian Raj Army, the military. And from there, Balochistan became a springboard in the wars, the Anglo-Afghan War, the first, second, and third war. And our territory, the Balochistan territory, was used to pacify Afghanistan so that to stop the Russian advances into the region, the Tsarist advances. But later on, the World War II happened and World War I before that. And since then, in 1947, when after the World War II and the British was quitting South Asia and India, that's the time when Balochistan's independence and sovereignty issue came to the surface again because of the treaty agreements that Kalat had with the British Crown. Especially, I would like to mention the Treaty of 1854 and the Treaty of 1876, which was basically an extension, further development of the 1854 Treaty between Kalat and the British Crown, in which Balochistan's sovereignty, first of all, was accepted, and Balochistan was accepted as a sovereign state, as a nation. And the British also had to accept the fact that Balochisan, as soon as these wars, these conditions of wars on the borders with Afghanistan were ending, Balochisan would be left in its pre-1839 state and status. During that time, what has changed a lot, Balochistan was also divided during this time without the consent of Kalat, without the consent of Baloch rulers and the people. For example, the Goldsmith Line of 1871 brought a big division in the Baloch lands. So there was a huge tract of loss of Baloch lands without our consent, and it was handed over to Iran, which is now also known as the Western Balochistan. That's where the Jabar is, Zaidan is the capital of the Western Balochistan. And so also we lost Balochistan to Afghanistan during the Duran line demarcation. So these Anglo-Afghan demarcations, the boundary commissions that were established by the British Empire at that time were disastrous for the Baloch unity and for the Baloch struggle to become a sovereign nation. In 1947, when the British were leaving, according to the treaties and agreements, Balochistan was legally in a position to regain its sovereignty as a sovereign nation. It was declared on August 11, 1947. Balochistan became an independent nation based on those treaties and agreements with the British. But they were not honored as such because within 8 to 9 months, the newly created Pakistan invaded Kalat and other parts of Balochistan, the coastal areas in Makran, due to which Balochistan and Kalat were forced to the gunpoint. Our rulers were forced to become part of Pakistan. And the reason this time was because of the new Cold War that was coming into the world after the World War II, because this is the period when the socialist camp had established itself and the bipolar world needed safe and secure the British and the American, or the Anglo-British, Anglo-American system of economy, basically wanted a safe and a secure interest in the region to be secured by a state that can be controlled and that can be run directly. So basically, Balochistan once again became trapped into another global power game. And this time they wanted to stop the Reds, the Soviets, to enter into these regions like Afghanistan or up to through Balochistan up to the Arabian Sea or the warm waters as they call it. At that time, the Baloch resistance went on against the Pakistani state, and there were like 5 different periods of uprisings against the state for the rights and freedom. The ongoing present conflict in Balochistan is like 20 years old, 2 decades, in which Pakistani military has committed huge atrocities, war crimes against humanity in Balochistan. Thousands of Baloch families have gone missing. Thousands of Baloch activists have been taken away, imprisoned, tortured, and their bodies dumped, extrajudicially killed in custody. There's a long, tall list of human rights violations. The natural resources of Balochistan have been plundered since then. And also we see the end of Cold War, but a beginning of a new great game in which we have new players now. For example, China. China's entry into these regions and its expansion and expansionist designs that extend up to, through Gwadar, extend to the Arabian Sea. And in order to control the energy routes, become very close to it. And this is a challenge that is becoming very crucial for not only the West, but also the neighboring Afghanistan and India. Balochistan is again in the middle, in the midst of all this conflict between the rival powers and the global powers. The port of Gwadar, or Balochistan, was leased by the Pakistani state authorities by Islamabad to China. And since then, Gwadar has become a new Chinese colony in a way, and they are planning to colonize it further. There is an estimate of like within the next 20 years or 25 years that the whole region, the whole coast of Afghanistan will be populated by a large population from China, and probably that will be the language of the Afghanistan's coast if this is not stopped. It's a great threat, a crucial problem for the regional forces, regional players, and as well as international and Western countries. So Balochistan is the only, at this moment, nation in that area, in that territory, that is consciously and openly has challenged China and is resisting China's expansion and control of Balochistan, control of its ports, control of its coast. We are a very tiny nation with limited resources. What we can do and how long we can fight Pakistan's 600,000 military, and how long can we resist China's People's Liberation Army? These are all questions on the table, and everyone should understand that this is kind of a sacrifice on the part of the Baloch nation. We are paying these heavy prices for being entrapped into global rivalries of powers. At the same time, we are also sacrificing for the future of democracy and political stability in the region. And now I want to bring our attention again back to another crucial issue that is taking place in Afghanistan. For example, the Taliban invasion of Afghanistan backed by Pakistan. It seems like a repetition of what was happening during the 19th century, British trying to pacify Afghanistan, trying to send in troops in Afghanistan in order to control it and turn it into a buffer zone so that it can be the czarist expansion can be stopped. But now we don't have that rivalry situation. We don't have the Cold War anymore, but we have the remnants of it. What's left from that is a big mess. And that mess, in the midst of that mess, we stand as a Baloch nation on the borders with Iran and Afghanistan. Baloch nation wants peace in Afghanistan. We have always been instrumental. We can play a huge role without minus. Plus, we have to take away the equation from the equation Islamabad. That plan and is behind this Taliban's invasion. So, and that's not a secret anymore. It's very much in the international media. There's a demand coming up like Pakistan should be stopped, Pakistan should be sanctioned, and we do support such moves by the international community. That international community should take heed that in order to bring stability in Afghanistan, Pakistan needs to be stopped, and the nations in the region have to be supported, have to be recognized. Their sovereignty and their rights and freedoms have to be recognized. Balochistan's political quest for sovereignty must be understood, and the treaties and agreements we had internationally, the bilateral agreements with the British Crown, the Treaty of 1876, and also the standstill agreement that was signed by the British Crown, Lord Mountbatten, August Balochistan, Balochistan's ruler, and Jinnah. So that standstill agreement of August 4th clearly mentions Balochistan as a sovereign state, and it has to be respected. But that treaty was completely violated and not honored at all. These international agreements are very important for us. Our sovereignty is very important for us. So on this day, our 74th anniversary of our brief independence in 1947, August 11, reminds us that we are a nation. We love our freedom. We have our own heritage. We have our unique culture and language that has to be respected, that has to be accepted and recognized by the international community. And my message to the world leaders is that Balochistan is a state is a country, is a nation that wants peace in the region. We are a people who have great tolerance for uh, religious minorities and any form of secular and other ideologies. So, and all we want right now is that we need our peace as well. We need our freedom so that we can play a better and larger role in bringing stability and peace to the region, the war-torn region that has been part of war and atrocities for the last 40 years. We have been suffering, Baloch people have been suffering, and we need the support of the international community so that we can be a part of this international move to bring stability in the region and as well as to stop the expansionist designs of Beijing that is fueling actually this whole conflict in the region by bringing in the People's Liberation Army, by occupying, taking control over the coastal parts of Balochistan, and by expanding into the sea and the land in the region in which the conflicts will develop manifold. And it seems like the Pakistani state, the Iran, the Taliban, and China, they are on the same page. And Balochistan, the Baloch nation, wants to make it very clear to the world powers and international community that Baloch nation is struggling and will resist and keep on fighting, keep on struggling for our rights, for our sovereignty, and for peace in the world and for peace in the region, to stop these forces of darkness to take control over their own people. Not only that, but also incursions into other nations' territories. Thank you.
بلوچ راج دفتر تحت شي بازي روچستان के बलूच आनी सर पहर उशार कुतकन ए रोचनी तह यक्के बलूचिस्तान आजवी रोच बेजा 11 अगस्त 1942 वक्तन ए रोच बलूच बरतानिया कब्जागिरी आजूबित ओ यक वतवाजही मुल्क जोड़ बित भले बाज़े मियान उस्तमानी जावर ओ बलूच जिंदे निजूरिया नि सोबा बलूच एकरंदे पदा पाकिस्तान गुलाम जोड़ बित उदांगता दसगीरे बलूच पवती आजुया द हमाई के पाकिस्तान बलूचिस्तान सरवती कब्जा बरजमदाश तक बलूचा मोती जोदा मुदाम देमा बरगाइन ए जोदे पड़ा हजारे वरनाए सर कमाश गुआर शहीद वित्तगंत उदांगत जिंदानियन नुमती गप्पा देमा बरान वती दूमी गस्ते त्रानकार और बलूच नेशनल मूवमेंट बुंजाई इंफॉर्मेशन और कल्चरल सेक्रेटरी वजह दिल मुराद बलूच दसबंदी कने के वती गप्पा मालू के देमा इरकंत
मरुची 11 अगस्त रोज प बलोच कौमा यक आम रोच नहीं बल्कि ये हमा रोच बलोचा मजनी जद्दोजहद हजारानी साबा पति सरानी कुर्बानिया पद ई रोच दिस्तक च इंग्रेजे द्राजें गुलामिया पद बलोच किस्ती 11 अगस्त रोचा आज़ाद बीतिम ई रोचा गो बलोच कौमे किस्ते हजार अरमान हजार वाहक बल्कि बलोच कौमी तकदीर गुमे रोचा बंदो के गो के बलोच आज़ादी रोच सक्काबाज कम बनतिम भले आज़ादी यक साहते च गुलामिये 1000 साला ज्यादा अर्जिश दारी तिम بلوچ مسئلہ صرف پاکستان جوڑ بوگ یا پاکستان قبضہ شروع نہ بھی تم بلکہ بلوچ مسئلہ پاکستان ہما جوڑ کنو کم برطانیہ آئے گا شروع بھی تم برطانیہ کستے وتی زمانہ گا دنیا سکا مزنے یک نو آبادیاتی طاقت تے بھی آئی تھی ریجن سرا قبضہ کم ہمیں وڑا بلوچستان سرا ہم قبضہ کم گو کہ برطانیہ قبضہ ہندوستان ای دیگہ علاقہ چے بلوچستان سرا مختلف بھی تم بلے قبضہ و برحال قبضہ ہم برطانیہ وڑے طاقتی خلافہ بلوچ سر جہل نکن تم بلوچ کستے مسلسل قربانی دنتم تا وحدے کے بلوچ ہوتی قومی آزادی حاصل کنتم بلے بلوچ آزادی ماہ سک باز کم بنتے اور برطانیہ جوڑ کرتگیں ریاست پاکستان بلوچ سرزمین سرا قبضہ کنتے یہ قبضہ ایو کا پاکستان قوتا چھ نبی تم یہ قبضہ ایو کا پاکستان خواہش نبی تم بلکہ یہ قبضہ پشتہ ہم برطانیہ کستن دستوار بھی تم چیا کہ برطانیہ را مستقبلہ وتی مفاداتانی وستی اسٹریٹجک مفاداتانی واسطہ یک چوکیداری ضرورت تم ضرورت صرف اور صرف پاکستان پورے کرت ہندوستان یا دیگر ملک کیا حقیقی معنی کستے آزادی گفتگش برطانیہ ہمزان کی آئے برطانیہ کستے ضرورت پورا نہ کنم آئیں کستے درمیان ایک پاکستان جوڑ کو پاکستان وتی جغرافیہ اتہا پنجاب یا ایتا کستے خیبر پختونخوا آوار کن یا سندھا آوار کن چوشیم بستارے نداشتے کہ مستقبلہ کسی اسٹریٹجک ہما کے مفادم آئینی آیاں کستیں پورو کرت پہ کم لہٰذا برطانیہ سے کہنا چے پاکستان کستیں بلوچ سرزمین سرا قبضہ کنتیں نو ما چاریں کہ پاکستان کہیں بلوچستان بلوچ سرزمین سندھ سندھی سرزمین پنجاب پنجابی سرزمین پختونخوا پٹھان سرزمین یا افغانستان افغان سرزمین پاکستان کہیں پاکستان کستے ما وعدے کہ پاکستان غیر فطری گوشاں آئی وجہ ہمیشہ کہ ریاست تانی ہما کے ریاستی جوڑ بو گواستا ہما لہتے ضرورت باں لہتے بنیادی چیز باں کستے پاکستان کر رہنے استیں پاکستان نہ قوم نہ آئیرہ یک تاریخی ہستیں کہ ماں گوشن کی جی پاکستانی قوم 1000 سالائی تاریخی بلوچ آرہ کستیں 9000 یا 11000 کستیں تاریخی آج آثار قدیمہ ثابتیں کہ یہ قوم کستیں تاریخی ہمیں وڑا سندھی بھی تم بلے پاکستان نامی قوم کستیں تاریخ تا کسرہ نظر نئے تم یہ یک خود ساختیں یا کستیں وط گڑیں یا کسے سامراجی ضرورت ہے آرہ کسے سامراجی طاقت چاہنم آدھگے کسے بلوچ یا سندھی یا پٹھانانی کسے سرزمین سرا قبضہ کنتم اور تاکہ سامراجانی کسے سامراجی طاقت تانی مفاد وابستہ ہم پاکستان ہمیں وڑا کسے برجم یا ہما کے مقبوضیں قوم ہم آیاں تنایا ہما طاقت حاصل نہ کرتا کہ ریاست طرف پروشدات پکنا وتی قومی آزادی بگرم لہذا پاکستان برجم مانی تم بھلے اما تاریخی حقائقانی بنیادہ پچارے یا حق کو باطل جنگانی تاریخہ پچارے گڑا او دا تو پاکستان واسطہ بقا نہ گندے نہ پاکستان راستی سرائیں نہ پاکستان رچشیں تاریخی ہستیں نہ پاکستان رکھستیں چوشیں بنیادی ہستیں کہ پاکستان را داشت پکنتیں یہ کہتے ہیں 70 سال غلامیہ بلوچا وتی وسا بلوچا وتی واقع بلوچا وتی حالتانی مطابقہ کہتے ہیں پاکستان غلامی سرا غلامی دیما سر جال نکرتا اولی روچا چے بلوچ مزاحمت آ کہتے ہیں برقراریں آ دیم پر منزلہ روانیں گو کہ یہ درمیانہ مزاحمت کہتے ہیں ہما تسلسلیں آ تسلسل وڑا برجم دارگ نبوتا کہ اچائیا میں منزل کہتے ہیں نزدیک تر ببوتے یا کہتے ہیں میں آؤ کہ نسل آئینی واسطہ کم تر کار پشت پکپتے بلے ماں مرچی کہتے ہیں ہما مومنٹا گندم 20 سال ہیں پاکستان مسلسل جبر پاکستان مسلسل نسل کشیہ باوجود کہتے ہیں بلوچ مومنٹا کہتے ہیں وتی وجود داشتا وتی تسلسل داشتا اور ثابت کرتا کہ نو بلوچ شعوری ارتقاء بلوچ یکجہتی بلوچ تحریک آگو ہمبستگی ہما جاگہ ساریں کہ آرا نو پاکستان پر ظلم پاکستان پر بربریت پاکستان پر نسل کشیہ داشت نکنتم پرچہ یہ 20 سالانی تا مدیس تا چشیں کہتے ہیں بربریت شکلے چشیں بربریت صورت پشت نکبتا کہ آرا کہتے ہیں پاکستانہ بلوچ قوم خلافہ کارمرز نہ کرتا یہ جد و جہد تسلسل یہ کہتے ہیں تحریکہ کو ہمبستگی مر ہمیں گوشی کہ بلوچ زانت بلوچ گپا پوہنگ کے غلامی انسان را چون تباہ کن غلامی قوم را چون تباہ کنتم بلوچ مرچی سرپدم کہ قوم گو دو ربیدگاں زانک بان قوم گو تہذیب و ثقافتاں زانک بان قوم گو وتی زبانہ زانک بیتیں قوم گو وتی لہتیں اقدار لہتیں ویلیوزاں کسیں زندگ بیتیں وحدے تا چیردست پہ تو غلام بے نہ تا وتی دو ربیدگاں داشت کنے نہ وتی زبانہ داشت کنے نہ کسیں وتی اقدار و ویلیوزاں داشت کنے تئی سرا کسیں دشمن ہما کے درآمدی ثقافتیں یا ہماری زبانیں آیاں کسیں تی سرا مشیتیں یہ مسلسل یک پریکٹس ہے آرا کسیں آئی اسکول کان آرا آئی کالج کان آرا آئی یونیورسٹی کان آئی کسیں دیگا ایکیڈمک سرکل کنا یا آئی کسیں دیگا سیول یا ملٹری یا آدھگے ادارہ مسلسل کسیں ظلم و جبرہ چے علاوہ آئینی ہمیں کوششیں کہ بلوچ ہمائنی کسے رنگا برجیتم بلوچ زبانہ وتی گار پکان بلوچ وتی کلچرہ گار پکان بلوچ وتی رسم و دوداں گار پکن تم یہ وحدی چیز کے نبیاں گوڑا قوم پشت نکپاں قوم کسے افرادی قوت یا مردمانی سارک وشک نبنتے قوم کسے لاہتیں گو دو ربیدگاں زانک بم بلے بلوچا گوتی دو ربیدگا گوتی تاریخا گوتی تہذیبا گوتی ویلیوزاں بلوچے ہما کے مہرم ہما کے محبتم ہما کے عشقم ماں سمجھیں کہ یہ کسیں 20 سال جد و جہد ثابت کن کہ بلوچ ایشانی کسیں یلا دے گا ہچبر تیار نہم آئی قیمت تا ادا کنگا تیار ہیں آئی قیمت تا کسیں وستگیں وحدہ ہنچو ادائی کرتا مرچی ہم بلوچ کسیں مزنی قیمت پر کنگائیں وتی کسیں حیثی سرانی صورتا وتی بچانی صورتا وتی نیاڑیانی صورتا وتی کسیں جان و مال بلوچ کسیں ہمروچ کسیں ہنکین سوچک بو گائیں بلوچ حلق سوچا گائیں یہ درہ قیمت تیم بلوچ کسیں ادا کنگائیں وتی کسیں آجوئیے وتی منزلے مرچی ریجن تہا کسیں حالات انتہائی تیزیہ کو بدل بو گائیں دنیا سیاست تیزیہ کو بدل بو گائیں بلوچے ہر ورنہ ارا بلوچے ہر کماش ارا بلوچے ہر ماس گوہار ارا کسیں انفرادی حیثیتا اجتماعی حیثیتا ضرور چوتا یہ سوال کنگیم ضرور اے بابتا جیڑگیں کہ بلوچ قوم ہے ہمیں ہزارانی حسابہ ورنان کماشان ماس گوہاران شہید بوتگاں آئینی کستے ہون رہتگاں या बलोच है किसने हजारा हिसाब मखलूक पाकिस्तान किसने जिंदाना बंदे आईनी मकसद शी बूता आ कई वास्ता किसने दर्द सक्यू सूरी सग गायम आन हेच दिगा कस्से न जाती जेड़े बूता न किसने कस्से जाती दैनिया शुता ये द्रा किसने प बलोच है कौमी आजोयो वास्ता शुता गम और मरुची बलोच किस्ते नाना पहराने ये ना कि बलोच किस्ते नेजगार मखलूके बलोच किस्ते अरगुजा कदम एरबी आ जमीन किस्ते सरबरा किस्ते आबादें या जमीना किस्ते पट्ट चेर आ किस्ते च मादन मादनियत पुर्रिम भले आई मालिक नहीं बलोच किस्ते पर दो वक्त नाना हैराने बलोच किस्ते मर्ची हजारानी हिसाब वरना जिंदाना आयनी मास आयनी गुहार किस्ते रोडानी सरा दरपदरम आ किस्ते शपुरो फिरियाद आया या खंचे जालिम फिरवूनी देमा कि आई किरा इंसान इंसानी अकदार आ किस्ते हिच माना नदारन तिम बलोच शोभ हाय जिंदगी हर पिड़ा किस्ते पसमानदा है हर पिड़ा किस्ते आ जलालता गुंदे पदे में आई वजह दिगा नहीं आये नहीं कि बलोच निजगारे बलोच या नाबूदे बलोच बेसलाहियतें कौमें आई वजह यकीन किस्ते में कौमी गुलामी जब तक बलोच कौमी गुलामी ख़त्म न बीते जब तक माँ किस्ते दुनिया एदगे राजानी किस्ते सफ़ा यक आज़ाद कौमी हैसियत दे मनाया मैं किस्ते ये मसला मैं ये मुश्किलात मैं ये किस्ते वारी वज़गी किस्ते ख़त्म न बयम भले बलोचा ये साबित करता कि आज़ादी मर्ची रसी या बांदा रसी तिम आई वास्ते दिगे टाइम लिमिटे किस्ते दात कस्से टाइम पीरियड दात न का भले बलोच किस्ते हमें जज्बा गो हमें जज्बे कुर्बानिया गो दांग की वती मंजिला सरमबीते आ किस्ते ये सफ़र बर जाएं और ये सफ़र किस्ते बर जमानी थे मिन्नतवार
The Baloch nation has suffered a lot. From 1839 till today, the sufferings and the sacrifices are going shoulder to shoulder. Thousands of Baloch has lost their lives and many others remain in dungeons. And one of the very few people who have seen these historical events, who has been part of the various historical moments of Baloch history, who has been part of the Baloch struggle for the longest time, and his teachings are the beacon for the Baloch students and the Baloch national struggle. Today, our very last guest and the chief guest of this event, it is my pleasure, it is honor for me to be part of this event where one of those personalities is speaking who is just not part of the history, but he is the history. He has created his own history with his struggles, with his writings, with his teachings. So for the very last speaker, I would like to call Mir Mohammad Ali Talpur to give us the historical background of these events when the Balochistan was occupied and it was freed, and what is going on after the 11th August 1947.
Dear and respected friends, the date 11th August 1947 has immense significance for the Baloch nation and Balochistan and has been the landmark for Baloch history, particularly their present day history. The acceptance of Kalat state, that is Balochistan's independence by the British colonizers and the leaders of the yet to come into being Pakistan on August 4 under the Standstill Agreement led to the 11th August Declaration of Independence. The British, not known for honoring treaties, had accepted its 1876 treaty obligations with Kalat state to render it a special place among the then princely states, and thus agreed to accord Kalat state independence along with India and Pakistan. It was under the treaties of the past and the Standstill Agreement that the Khan of Kalat, Mir Mohammad Ali Khan, declared Kalat state independent on 11th August 1947. This was in keeping with the will and aspirations of Baloch people who wanted to be the masters of their own destiny and fate. There was jubilation all around because the era of colonization was eventually coming to an end, and there would be a life in keeping with the Baloch history and freedom to live without being dictated by those for whom personal interests were supreme. This jubilation and euphoria soon disappeared because soon after 14th August, the newly formed Pakistan state began to put pressure on Khan Kalat to accede to it, despite the fact that they had signed the agreement to honor sovereignty of the Kalat state and were morally bound to honor it. But then, motivated by greed and predatoriness, have no place for morality or honor, they pursue the goals with the single-mindedness of a hunter after his prey. One doesn't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that the signing of August 4th agreement was a subterfuge, and they, with their actions, soon exposed their real intentions of never accepting sovereignty of the Baloch nation or letting them enjoy the status of an independent country. The Kalat state had its own parliament of two houses, the Diwan-e-Aam and Diwan-e-Khas. The parliament held sessions in September and December 1947, and most members favored an alliance and not accession with Pakistan under any circumstances. The members of both houses absolutely rejected accession to Pakistan and made it abundantly clear in their speeches. On December 14, 1947, Darul Awam passed a resolution reaffirming its intention to remain independent and not to accede under any circumstances. The speech that Mir Mohammad Ali delivered in the Diwan-e-Aam that day represented the feelings, sentiments and stance of all Baloch. In this landmark speech, he underlined the argument for the Baloch desire to remain independent and to remain free from the historical baggage of two nations theory that the newly created Pakistan carried with it. This separation of communities based on hate was bound to burden and undermine both the states, because hate devours those who initiate it and try to cash on it and want to thrive and remain in power by appealing to the basest of the human quality. The results of the hate-based separations are for now all to see, and it was these disastrous consequences that the Baloch leaders feared and wanted to avoid by remaining independent, aloof of the environment of hate and confrontation. Mohammad Ali summed it all up in his speech, wherein he said, quote, "We have a distinct civilization and a separate culture like that of Iran and Afghanistan. We are Muslims, but it is not necessary that by virtue of being Muslims we should lose our freedom and merge with others. If mere fact that we are Muslim requires us to join Pakistan, then Afghanistan, Iran, both Muslim countries should also amalgamate with Pakistan. We were never a part of India before the British rule. Pakistan's unpleasant and loathsome desire that a national homeland, Balochistan, should merge with it is impossible to consider. We are ready to have friendship with that country on basis of sovereign equality, but by no means ready to merge with Pakistan. We can survive without Pakistan, but the question is, what Pakistan would be without us? I do not propose to create hurdles for the newly created Pakistan in the matters of defense and external communication, but we want an honorable relationship, not a humiliating one. If Pakistan wants to treat us as a sovereign people, we are ready to extend the hand of friendship and cooperation. If Pakistan does not agree to do so, flying in face of democratic principles, such an attitude will be totally unacceptable to us. And if we are forced to accept this fate, then every Baloch son will sacrifice his life in defense of his national freedom, unquote. He, in his speech, covered every aspect that expressed the Baloch desire for a life of dignity and freedom. Therefore, this speech should be highlighted to make the present generation aware of how the elders responded and thought even in the direst circumstances of 1947 and 48 period. But Pakistan had different plans, and it, with its delusional sense of historical importance, was unwilling to allow an independent Baloch state and continued to put pressure on Khan of Kala, Ahmad Yar Khan, to merge with Pakistan. As Khan was not willing to accede, Pakistan made use of traitors to Baloch motherland and to effectively undermine his authority. On March 18, 1948, it signed separate instruments of accession with Lasbela, Haran and Makran, leaving a truncated and landlocked Balochistan for Baloch. Despite that, Khan was unwilling, and when Pakistan was convinced that he would not accede, Pakistani army moved into Pasni, Jivani and Turbat on March 27, and Khan capitulated and merged with Pakistan on April 1, 1948. Under Kalat's constitution, he couldn't accede. Therefore, Khan's younger brother, Shahzada Abdul Karim, and followers resisted, but after promised amnesty, were arrested near Harboi. The sovereign Baloch state lasted for 227 days only. We should respect and honor our elders and our history, and not the history that we are forcibly fed, which enfeebles the mind that may see redemption in independence and to break our will, desire to be masters of a destiny. And moreover, with its version of history, also tries to make us a part of that historical baggage of hate that they carry. If we accept their version of history, we will be losers, for we will not only lose sight of our cherished goals, but also be alienated from a millenniums-old culture and history. We have to keep remembering the words of our elders and of those who have sacrificed their lives for the cherished goal of freedom. We should remember the trials and tribulations they had to undergo, and yet wavered not in those testing times by suffering imprisonments and exiles, and yet not giving up the desire to be free from all roots. More importantly, we should etch upon our souls the name of all those who gave their lives in their love for their motherland. Those brave sons of soil should become our windows to the vision they saw and for which they sacrificed their lives. All this said, it should be understood that though 11th August and the 227 days after it till March 27, 1948 do have a great historical importance for us, and that these need to be highlighted to help our generations understand the perfidy and the brute force with which our elders were forced to accede to Pakistan and were brought under a new yoke again. For us, it is even more important to understand that this was all then, and however much we may cry and shout what happened then will never change. We cannot continue to live in a dream. We cannot continue to live in a dream that we were once sovereign and be content with it. If we continue to simply practice self-delusion of living in the past and under shadows of the past glories, then the work in hand will become less important for us, and we will be enamored to the past and forget our responsibility of today and that of our future. We cannot be like that good-for-nothing son of a king who lost the kingdom to others but kept repeating the mantra of Pidaram Shahbud. That is, my father was a king. We should cherish the past, but never forget that our present responsibilities and our responsibility to the coming generations, future demands that we acquire knowledge, learn new skills, test out new ideas to continue to struggle for a life of dignity and of freedom. And above all, in all our pursuits, we should be guided by the eternal and the unfailing love of our motherland.
شما کلانی منتوار که شما میں دیوان بار زرد میں دیوان چارد میں جهود مدام ہمیں بھی کہ ما مدام جتا جتائیں سرحالانی سرا ہمیں وڑا وتی دیوانا برجم بداریں شما کلانی منتوار بلوچستان آجوباد بلوچ راج وشال باد